World War II should have been over when Japan officially surrendered on September 2, 1945, but a few Japanese soldiers refused to give up. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922 in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. When he was 17 years old, he went to work for the Tajima Yoko Trading Company in Wuhan, China. The moment he turned 18, he was enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Army Infantry. Onoda trained as a commando, specialized in air and amphibious assaults as well as survival skills at the Nakano School for Military Intelligence. After his training in December of 1944, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His orders included destroying the airstrip and the pier at the harbor in order to hamper enemy attacks on the island. He was also specifically ordered not to commit suicide before surrender. When Onoda reached Lubang Island, he met with a group of 3 higher-ranking officers. Since their orders had priority, Onoda had trouble focusing on his own orders, making it easier for the Allied forces to take the Philippine Islands in February 1945. After the opposing forces landed, Onoda had been promoted to lieutenant and found himself in command of 3 other soldiers. Onoda and his fellow soldiers, a private, a corporal, and a private first class, spent years in the hills of their designated island hiding out and wait for friendly forces to arrive. They had no radio or way to communicate, so they could only assume the war was still going or even lost. The first sign that the war was over was in October of 1945. A leaflet was left behind by islanders that said, "The war ended on August 15th. Come down from the mountains." Onoda's training told him that this was obviously a trick for them to come out and surrender, so he led his troops further into the hills. Towards the end of 1945, more pamphlets were dropped by an airplane over their last known location with a surrender statement from General Tomoyuki Yamashita of the 14th Area Army. Onoda's party once again assumed this was an Allied propaganda trick and did not trust it. In September 1949, one of the 4, Private Akatsu, went out on his own for nearly 6 months, but eventually surrendered to Filipino forces in 1950. The other 3 had heard of this and became even more cautious of their actions. In 1952, letters and pictures from their families begging them to come home were dropped in their area. Once again, they thought this was a trick and stayed in the mountains. In June 1953, Corporal Shimada was shot in the leg during a firefight with a local fisherman, which Onoda helped bandage. 2 years later, Corporal Shimada was shot and killed by a party looking for the group. Private First Class Kazuko was shot twice and killed by local police in 1972. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda was now alone. On February 20th, 1974, Norio Suzuki found Onoda while looking for Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. The 2 soon became friends, but Onoda refused to return because the order did not come directly from a commanding officer. Suzuki returned to Japan and found Onoda's previous commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, who became an author after the war. On March 9, 1974, Taniguchi flew to Lubang Island and Suzuki led him to Onoda. Taniguchi ordered Hiroo Onoda to surrender, and he happily obliged. After nearly 30 years of surviving in the hills of Lubang Island, Onoda could finally return home. After returning to Japan, Onoda was given a pardon by President Ferdinand Marcos. A large amount of money and back pay was offered, but he kept refusing. Eventually he was pushed to take it, but he ended up donating it to the Yasukuni Shrine, a memorial commemorated to people who had died during the Boshin and Indochina Wars. He went on to release an autobiography titled No Surrender, My 30-Year War. After a documentary where Philippine locals were interviewed, it was revealed that Onoda had killed several people and burned crops, something he did not mention in his autobiography. After the amount of attention he was receiving, he decided to move to Brazil where he started raising cattle. In 1984, Onoda returned to Japan after learning his parents had been murdered by a Japanese teenager. He then founded the Onoda Nature School, an education camp for children and teenagers to learn about survival skills. In 1996, he returned to Lubang Island, but this time he donated the equivalent of $10,000 for the local school. On January 16, 2014, Hiroo Onoda died from complications of pneumonia. He was hailed as a hero for surviving the hardships of the war long after it was over.
I feel satisfied that I protected my honour and carried out my mission to the end.